Hey, LCC friends and family. Lead Minister Brandon Bogue here with this week's Midweek Moment. Not too long ago in the world of social media, there was a hypothetical question that was so intriguing that literally hundreds of people weighed in on their potential answer for it. And the question was something along the idea of who would win in a knockdown, drag out, no holds barred fight. 100 men or a single silverback gorilla. It was really interesting to watch as people all around the world really tried to answer this question and came up with hypothetical scenarios or thought about who would the 100 men be, who would do the fighting. You'd even get input from zookeepers and experts from around the world weighing in on who they thought would answer. Ultimately, after weeks of this thing floating around the internet, it kind of seemed like there was a general consensus that as strong and as amazing and as powerful as one silverback gorilla is, it's tough to beat 100 men who come together with a single purpose. And yet there is a growing trend in the world of Christianity. More and more Christians are actively choosing to leave the church. They still consider themselves to be Christians. They just no longer want to associate with a church body. So it seems like it's a good time for us to discuss why we do that. Now, before we get to our usual why we should fellowship with one another, I think it's really, really important that first we talk about why these people are no longer wanting to attend church in the first place. So often we get entrenched with this notion of they should be going to church if they consider themselves to be Christians, that we don't stop to look at the question, well, why don't they want to come in the first place? Now, for some, sure, absolutely, it's because they just don't want to. They don't feel like they need to go. They don't want to be a part of it. But for a great many others, it's because of the way that they felt treated by the church. It's the way that they felt treated by the people that constitute and make up that church. In my first youth ministry, we had a young man, 14 years old, who started attending our youth group. And kind of that was his first real introduction to faith and God and who Jesus is and all sorts of other stuff. And after he'd been attending our youth group for a few months or so, he decided that he was ready to kind of take that next step and start attending a Sunday morning worship service. Now, his family had never attended church really his entire life. And so he had no idea what church was supposed to look like, what he was supposed to do, anything like that. And I as the youth minister, I viewed his coming to church as such a big and important deal. I was so excited that he was finally showing an interest in attending church as well. His very first Sunday, there was an older lady in our congregation who came up to this young man who she did not know on his very first church service ever and told him, rather aggressively, I might add, that she felt it was inappropriate that he was wearing jeans to church. How many more Sundays do you think he came? There are droves of people who have been hurt or offended by people in the church, even far deeper than people making comments about what they're wearing. And sometimes in very personal ways. Some of these folks have been the victims of gossip and slander from members of the church. Some have had very hurtful, mean-spirited things said to them by members of that church, by leaders of the church, even, by the ministers of those churches. And some, this breaks my heart, some have been victims of far worse than that. So for them, for those people, it is actually painful to even consider coming into a church building because all the word church does for them is conjure up very painful memories about the ways that they were treated within the walls of the church. And so Christians, maybe I should say church attending Christians, please, 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 please show them a little more grace than that. Maybe instead of asking them, why aren't you coming to church? Instead, you should maybe ask them, is there a reason why you don't feel like you can go to church? Is there something that I can do or pray for or help you work through that might help you feel more comfortable in coming back to church? Again, for so many, it's far deeper than that they love sleeping in. And if you are somebody who is in that boat, if you are somebody who has experienced painful words or worse from the church, then hear me when I say this. I am so deeply and utterly sorry that you've experienced that. My heart breaks for you that that's been your experience with church. And if there's anything that I can do to try to help make things right for you, or to hopefully help give you a different experience with the church, then please, by all means, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be glad to do whatever I can. That being said, I still firmly believe that it is important for us as believers in Jesus Christ to still gather together collectively. We talked about this a few weeks ago in a sermon of ours, but there are over 50 instances in the New Testament, the section of Scripture where we understand what it means to be a Christian. It's kind of the guide points of how Christians act and interact. But there are over 50 instances in that New Testament where the phrase one another appears. As we look at the teachings of Jesus himself, a great many of them are really him talking about ways that we are supposed to interact with each other and how we're supposed to treat each other in a church-type setting. And Paul's letters to the churches that he led were primarily written as a way to correct some of the ways that they were interacting with each other. And I say all that to say that it seems to point out in the New Testament that if we're going to be a follower of Jesus Christ, it means that we also have to learn how to interact with other followers of Jesus Christ. Like, the expectation is that we gather together. The reality of it is whenever you're involved in anything that involves other people, you run the risk of pain and hurt. And I'm not trying to minimize that for anybody by any stretch of the imagination, but I also think, in spite of all the flaws that there are in people gathering together, I also think there is tremendous benefit to our gathering together as a body of believers. It helps us spur each other along in our walk with Jesus. It helps us remain accountable in our walk with Jesus. And I think it is such an encouragement in our walk with Jesus simply to know that you have people who care about you, who love you, and who will believe the same as you believe. It is so difficult for us to try and face what life can and will throw at us when we're all by ourselves. Faith is hard enough to handle when you are regularly gathering with other believers, but when you try to go at it alone, it's nearly impossible. As the 100 men versus the single guerrilla resolution shows us, it shows that when we are together, we can accomplish the impossible. But when we try to take it all alone, well, then it's going to feel more like one man versus 100 guerrillas. And I don't think that's going to end out well. That's why we gather together. That's why we fellowship. That's why we do.